The stars were cold witnesses in the Wyoming night as Caleb Morgan stood outside his cabin, the Winchester rifle heavy in his hands. At 34, his face was weathered, lines etched deep by sun and grief. Behind him, through the cabin's frosted window, the faint sound of an infant's cry carried on the bitter December wind, weaker now than yesterday. He glanced back at the small structure that had once felt like home. Now it was just a wooden box filled with memories he couldn't escape, and a future slipping through his fingers like the snow swirling around his boots. "I tried everything, Grace," he whispered, his breath forming clouds in the darkness. "I swear to God I tried." The baby's cry faltered, then rose again, thinner now, desperate. Each sound was like a knife twisting in Caleb's gut. 5 weeks since Grace had been laid in the frozen ground, taken by childbed fever just days after giving their daughter life. 5 weeks of watching little Lily grow weaker, refusing the goat's milk and cow's milk he'd tried to feed her. 4 days since she'd taken more than a few sips. He raised the rifle, not toward the stars, but to rest against his shoulder as he closed his eyes. The cold metal against his cheek was almost a comfort, something solid in a world that had crumbled to dust around him. "Forgive me, Maman," he murmured, unsure if he was speaking to Colin, to Grace, or to the tiny daughter he had failed. A sudden gust of wind howled around the corner of the cabin, almost like a voice crying out in protest. Caleb opened his eyes, lowered the rifle, and turned back toward the door. Not yet. There was still time for a miracle, wasn't there? Inside, the cabin was warm at least, the fire in the stone hearth crackling. Lily's cradle sat close to its warmth, the hand-carved pine a testament to hopes Caleb had harbored just months ago. He'd worked on it each evening while Grace watched, her belly growing round with their child, her dark eyes soft with love as she mended by lamplight. "We're going to be so happy," she'd said, one hand resting on her stomach, the other reaching for his. "The three of us, Caleb, just to imagine." Now he carefully set the rifle in its rack and moved to the cradle, looking down at his daughter. 10 weeks old and so small, smaller than she should be. Her face was pinched, skin stretched too tight over delicate bones. Dark wisps of hair, Grace's hair, clung to her scalp. "Shh, little one," he whispered, lifting her gently. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of bird bones wrapped in blankets. "I know you're hungry, I know." He had tried everything. Goat's milk, cow's milk watered down, sugar water. Nothing worked. Nothing stayed down. Nothing replaced what Lily really needed, her mother's milk. Cradling her against his chest, Caleb moved to the cabinet where he kept the last bottle prepared. The liquid inside was lukewarm now, but it was all he had. Lily's lips barely moved against the rubber nipple, her strength fading. "Please, sweetheart," he begged, his voice breaking. "Just a little. For your papa." Outside, the December wind howled louder, the blizzard that had been threatening for days finally arriving, isolating Whispering Pines Ranch even more completely than usual. The doctor had already told him there was nothing more to be done. Without a wet nurse, without a mother's milk. Caleb gently returned Lily to her cradle and moved to the rough-hewn table where his tools lay. He selected a small board and began to carve letters with methodical care. "Infant hungry. Need milk. Please help. A fool's errand." No one traveled in this weather. No one would see the sign until spring, most likely. But it was something to do with his hands, while his heart shattered. When the carving was complete, he pulled on his heavy coat and stepped outside into the swirling snow. With numb fingers, he nailed the sign to the gatepost at the edge of his property. "Please," he whispered, the word immediately torn away by the howling wind. "Someone help us." The cabin seemed colder when he returned, despite the fire. Caleb removed his coat and boots, then moved to the cabinet where he kept his whiskey, untouched since Grace fell ill. He poured a generous measure, hoping it might dull the razor edges of his pain. Lily's cry had subsided to whimpers, each small sound tearing at what remained of Caleb's composure. He sat in the rocking chair beside her cradle, one hand reaching in to stroke her cheek. "Your mama would know what to do," he told her softly. "She always knew." In the flickering light, Caleb could almost see Grace moving around the cabin, humming as she worked, her dark hair escaping its pins, her smile lighting the room. They'd had 7 years together. Not enough, but more happiness than many were granted in a lifetime. Lily's whimpers grew fainter. Caleb set down his glass and lifted her again, holding her close against his heartbeat, willing his own strength to somehow flow into her. "Stay with me, little lily flower," he murmured into her downy hair. "Please stay." The hours crawled by, each one bringing Caleb closer to a dawn he dreaded. The storm outside intensified, snow piling against the windows. Inside, Caleb paced, rocked, prayed, and watched his daughter fade. By midnight, exhaustion had claimed him. He sat in the rocking chair, Lily against his chest, both of them finally still. The fire had died down to embers that cast long shadows across the wooden floor. In the near darkness, Caleb found himself speaking to Grace as if she might somehow hear him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I thought I was strong enough to raise her alone. I thought love would be enough." The wind seemed to pause for a moment, the cabin suddenly eerily silent except for Lily's shallow breathing. And then, cutting through that silence, knock, 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 Caleb jerked upright, certain he had imagined it. Who would be out in such weather? Knock, 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 louder this time, more desperate. "Hello? Is anyone there? Please." A woman's voice barely audible above the renewed howling of the wind. Caleb stood, carefully cradling Lily against him, and crossed to the door. His hand hesitated on the bolt. In these parts, strangers were approached with caution. But tonight, with death already hovering over his threshold, what did he have to fear? He drew back the bolt and pulled the door open against the force of the storm. Snow and wind immediately invaded the cabin, but in their midst stood a figure so coated in white that for an instant, Caleb's exhausted mind thought Grace had somehow returned to him. Then the figure swayed, nearly collapsing, and reality reasserted itself. "Please," the woman gasped. "My horse! I got lost! Please help me." She was small, bent against the cold, shivering violently. Her cloak was crusted with ice, her face barely visible beneath its hood. Without a word, Caleb pulled her inside, using his shoulder to force the door closed against the wind. For a moment, they stood in silence, Caleb holding Lily, the stranger dripping melted snow onto his floor. "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. "Thought I was going to die out there." "You might have," Caleb replied. "Nobody travels in weather like this." She pushed back her hood, revealing a face younger than he had expected, late 20s perhaps, with dark hair plastered to her forehead and cheeks. Her eyes, when they met his, were a startling blue-gray, like the sky after a storm. "I didn't have much choice," she said. Then her gaze fell to the bundle in his arms, and something changed in her expression. "You have a baby." It wasn't quite a question, but Caleb nodded anyway. "My daughter, Lily." The woman took a step closer, her movements careful despite her obvious exhaustion. "She's not well." Again, not a question. Caleb swallowed hard. "No, her mother died 5 weeks ago. Childbed fever. Lily won't take a bottle. I've tried everything I know to trauma him." He hadn't meant to say so much, to expose his desperation to this stranger. But the words tumbled out, as if his soul recognized something in her that might understand. The woman's gaze remained fixed on Lily, and Caleb saw her hands rise unconsciously toward the child, then drop back to her sides. "How old?" she asked softly. 10 weeks. Something flickered across her face. Pain, recognition. He couldn't tell which. She swayed slightly, and Caleb realized she was on the verge of collapse. "You need to get warm and dry," he said, gesturing toward the fire. "There are blankets on the shelf. I can't offer much else right now, but you're welcome to what I have." "My name is Caleb Morgan," he offered. "This is Whispering Pines Ranch." "Eleanor," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Eleanor Winters." Eleanor's hands trembled as Caleb placed Lily in her arms. The baby felt impossibly light, even lighter than William had been in his final days. So small, so fragile, a life hanging by the thinnest of threads. She sat in the rocking chair beside the fire, adjusting her position to support the infant's head. Lily's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, her tiny face pinched with hunger. Eleanor recognized the signs all too well: the sunken fontanelle, the dry lips, the papery skin. This child was at death's door. With fingers made clumsy by cold and emotion, Eleanor began to unbutton the front of her dress. She was acutely aware of Caleb Morgan standing nearby, his presence both awkward and desperately necessary. Her dress open, she guided Lily to her breast, watching the baby's face for any sign of response. For a terrible moment, there was nothing. No movement, no recognition, no instinct to suckle. Eleanor felt panic rising in her throat. "Please, little one," she whispered. "Please, Treepaw." As if hearing her plea, Lily's lips moved slightly, brushing against Eleanor's nipple. Then, miracle of miracles, she latched, weakly at first, then with growing determination. Eleanor felt the familiar pull, the release of milk, and with it came a flood of emotion so powerful she could barely breathe. "Oh," she gasped, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Oh, she's feeding. She's really feeding." She looked up to find Caleb watching them, his weathered face transformed by hope and disbelief. He took a step forward, then stopped, clearly unsure of his place in this intimate moment. Is it working?" he asked, his voice thick. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. She stroked Lily's dark hair with trembling fingers, marveling at how perfect the baby's head felt, cradled in her palm. So like William's, yet entirely her own person. "You're doing so well," she murmured to the infant. "That's it, sweet girl. That's it." Lily suckled weakly but steadily, her tiny hands coming up to rest against Eleanor's skin. The familiar gesture, so like William's, sent a fresh wave of grief through Eleanor. But mixed with it now was something else. Joy, perhaps, or purpose. Caleb sank to his knees beside the chair, one large hand coming to rest lightly on his daughter's back. Eleanor could feel him trembling. "Thank you," he said, the words rough with emotion. "Thank you." Eleanor could only nod, her own emotions too complex to articulate. She had come here seeking shelter from death, only to find herself giving life instead. They remained like that for what seemed a long time. Caleb kneeling, Eleanor rocking gently, Lily nursing between them. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the cabin, but inside, a different kind of storm was calming. When she finally released Eleanor's breast, falling into a milk-drunk sleep, the change was already visible. Her face looked less pinched, her breathing deeper and more regular. "She hasn't slept like that in days," Caleb said softly, his gaze fixed on his daughter's face. Eleanor shifted Lily gently to her other breast, and the baby latched again without waking fully, instinct guiding her. "She'll need to eat often," Eleanor said, finding her voice at last. "Every 2 to 3 hours, at least until she regains her strength." Caleb nodded, finally rising from his knees to stand awkwardly beside the chair. "I should let you change into dry clothes," he said, gesturing to a trunk where he had placed his wife's things. "And you must be hungry yourself." The mention of food made Eleanor realize she was indeed famished. She had eaten nothing since morning, and her body was now giving what little strength it had left to Lily. "Yes," she admitted, "but let her finish first." Caleb moved away, busying himself at the small stove in the corner of the cabin. Eleanor heard him opening cabinets, the soft clink of dishes. While he worked, she studied his back. Tall and broad-shouldered, his movements efficient despite his obvious exhaustion. His hair was dark brown, curling slightly over his collar, too long, as if haircuts had become an irrelevant luxury in recent weeks. When Lily finally fell into deep sleep, Eleanor carefully adjusted her dress and looked up to find Caleb approaching with a steaming bowl. "Just stew," he said apologetically. "Nothing fancy, but it's hot." "Thank you." She tried to shift Lily to pass her back to her father, but the baby made a small sound of protest. "You can hold her while you eat," Caleb said, placing the bowl on a small table beside the rocking chair. "She seems comfortable with you." "She's beautiful," Eleanor said softly, adjusting Lily against her shoulder. "She has your eyes." "The rest is all grace," Caleb replied, a shadow crossing his face. "My wife, she had that same dark hair, same little nose." He paused, swallowing hard. "She was everything." Eleanor nodded, understanding more than he could know. "My husband Daniel died in a mining accident 2 months before William was born," she offered. "Sometimes I think it was the grief that made William so fragile from the start." She hadn't meant to share so much, but something about this night, this place, this moment seemed to demand honesty. Caleb pulled a chair close to the fire and sat. "I'm sorry for your losses," he said, and the simplicity of the statement held more genuine compassion than all the platitudes Eleanor had endured in recent months. "And I for yours," she replied. They fell silent then, the only sounds the crackling of the fire, the howling of the wind outside, and Lily's soft breathing. Eleanor ate the stew one-handed, the other arm securely cradling the sleeping infant. "How did you come to be out in such weather?" Caleb asked after a time. Eleanor sighed. "I was traveling to Redemption Creek to my sister Victoria's boarding house. My horse spooked and threw me, then ran off. I've been walking since, following what I thought was the trail." She didn't tell him the rest. How she had almost welcomed the icy embrace of the storm. How a part of her had wondered if freezing to death might be a gentle way to join William and Daniel. "You're lucky you found Whispering Pines," Caleb said. "There's nothing else for miles in this direction." "Lucky," Eleanor echoed, looking down at Lily's sleeping face. "Yes, I suppose we all were tonight." Caleb's gaze followed hers to his daughter, and his expression softened. Can you stay?" he asked hesitantly. "Just until the storm passes? Until I can find another solution for Lily?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to address. Eleanor knew what he was really asking. Would she continue to feed his daughter? Would she save this child when she couldn't save her own? "Yes," she said simply. "I'll stay." Caleb woke with a start, disoriented by the stillness. The fire had died to embers, casting the cabin in shadow, but the howling of the wind had ceased. For a moment he couldn't recall why he was sleeping in the chair instead of his bed, why his neck ached from the awkward angle. Then memory rushed back. Lily's desperate condition, the stranger in the storm, the miracle of his daughter finally feeding. He rose stiffly, adding wood to the fire before crossing to Lily's cradle out of habit. Finding it empty sent a jolt of panic through him before he remembered. She was with Eleanor, in the bedroom. The windows showed only darkness outside. Pre-dawn, Caleb guessed. It had been hours since Eleanor had retired with Lily. Hours of the deepest, most untroubled sleep Caleb had experienced since Grace's death, despite the discomfort of the chair. He moved quietly to the bedroom door, pressing his ear against it. Silence. No crying, no movement, nothing to indicate whether all was well within. The decision was made for him when a soft cry emerged from behind the door. Lily, awake and hungry again. Caleb waited, listening for sounds of Eleanor stirring, but heard nothing. After a moment's hesitation, he tapped lightly on the door. "Ms. Winters," he called softly. When there was no response, he turned the handle and pushed the door open just enough to peer inside. The room was dark except for a thin shaft of firelight spilling through the doorway. It illuminated the bed where Eleanor lay curled around Lily, both still deeply asleep despite the baby's increasing fussiness. "Ms. Winters," Caleb tried again, a little louder. "Eleanor." She didn't stir, her breathing deep and regular. Lily's cries grew more insistent. Reluctantly, Caleb entered the room and approached the bed. He reached down to touch Eleanor's shoulder gently. "Eleanor," he said close to her ear, "Lily's hungry." Eleanor jerked awake with a camise, her arms instinctively tightening around Lily. "William," she mumbled, disorientation clouding her eyes. "No," Caleb said gently, stepping back to give her space. "It's Lily, my daughter. She's hungry again." Eleanor's face shifted as reality returned, a flash of raw grief crossing her features before she carefully composed herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered, looking down at Lily with a mixture of tenderness and pain. "Sometimes in those first moments of waking, I forget." "You don't need to explain," Caleb said quietly. The simple admission revealed more about her loss than any lengthy confession could have. He recognized that momentary confusion, had experienced it himself calling Grace's name in the dark, and understood it wasn't madness, but the heart's resistance to permanent loss. Eleanor blinked, confusion giving way to recognition, then to a flash of grief so raw it made Caleb's chest ache in sympathy. "Of course," she said, her voice rough with sleep and emotion. "Lily, I'm sorry." "No need to apologize," Caleb said, turning away as Eleanor sat up and began to arrange herself and the baby for feeding. "Would you like some water or coffee?" "Water, please," Eleanor replied, and he could hear the sounds of Lily latching and beginning to nurse. Caleb returned with water, keeping his eyes averted as he placed the cup on the bedside table. "Thank you," Eleanor said, her voice steadier now. "What time is it?" "Early still," Caleb replied, glancing at the window. "Maybe 4 or 5 in the morning. The storm's quieted some." Eleanor nodded, her attention focused on Lily, who was nursing vigorously now, a marked improvement from the weak attempts of just hours before. "She's stronger already," Eleanor observed, a note of wonder in her voice. "Because of you," Caleb said simply. Eleanor looked up at him then, really looked, her blue-gray eyes searching his face. "I should tell you," she said slowly, "about William, about what happened after." She trailed off, but Caleb understood what she was trying to say. If she was to stay, if she was to continue feeding Lily, he needed to know her story. "Only if you want to," he said, pulling the rocking chair closer to the bed and sitting, giving her the choice to speak or remain silent. Eleanor's gaze dropped back to Lily, her fingers gently stroking the baby's cheek as she nursed. "After William died," she began softly, "I wasn't, well, the grief consumed me in ways I couldn't control." She paused, swallowing hard. "Victoria took me in at her boarding house in Redemption Creek. She meant well, but I couldn't bear the constant presence of strangers, their pitying glances, their well-intentioned but hollow comforts. And my body," Eleanor continued, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. "My body refused to accept what my mind knew." The milk continued, a constant physical reminder of what I'd lost. She looked up at Caleb, her expression a mixture of shame and defiance. "Victoria found me one night, in what had been William's nursery, what I was doing. It frightened her. After that, she began arrangements with a doctor from Cheyenne, an asylum." Caleb felt a chill at her words. Asylums were places few returned from, especially women deemed hysterical or melancholic. "But you weren't committed," he said. Eleanor shook her head. "No. I fled before the doctor could come for me. Took what money I had, bought a horse, and left without a word. I had nowhere to go. Just away, away from the memories, from Victoria's pitying looks, from the asylum walls closing in around me." She shifted Lily to her other breast, the movement practiced and gentle. "I didn't plan to come this way. And then the storm came, and my horse threw me, and I thought perhaps it was fitting that I would die in the snow alone like I deserved." "No one deserves that," Caleb said quietly. Eleanor's eyes met his, filled with unshed tears. "Don't they? I couldn't save my son, Caleb. I watched him waste away from the fever, and nothing I did, none of the medicines or prayers, made any difference. What kind of mother fails so completely?" The question hung in the air between them, raw and unanswerable. Caleb thought of Lily, of his own helplessness as she refused bottle after bottle. "The same kind of father I am, I suppose," he said finally. "If you hadn't come tonight—" He didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew what would have happened. "Perhaps that's why I was led here," Eleanor said softly, a trace of wonder in her voice. "Perhaps William guided me somehow." Caleb wasn't sure he believed in such things, not anymore, but he couldn't deny the extraordinary coincidence that had brought Eleanor to his door on this of all nights. "Tell me about Grace," Eleanor said after a time. "If you want to." It was only fair, Caleb supposed, that he share his grief as she had shared hers. "She came from back east," he began. "Boston. She was hired to teach at the schoolhouse in Redemption Creek. I met her in town one day. She was buying supplies, arguing with old man Henderson about the price of books for the school. She was magnificent, fearless." The memory brought a small smile to his face. "We were married a year after she arrived, and I brought her here to Whispering Pines." He gestured around the room. "This was all just a crude cabin then. She made it a home, added the bedroom, insisted on proper windows, planted flowers that had no business growing in Wyoming territory, but somehow flourished anyway." Eleanor smiled at that, a genuine smile that transformed her tired face. "She sounds remarkable." "She was," Caleb agreed, "strong in every way that mattered. Until—" He trailed off, the memories of Grace's final days still too painful. "The childbed fever," Eleanor finished for him. "It's a cruel illness, so quick, so merciless." Caleb nodded, grateful not to have to explain. "I promised Grace," he said simply, As she was dying, I promised I would keep Lily safe, that I would give her a good life. I've been failing at that promise every day since. Until tonight, Eleanor corrected him. Tonight, you saved her by letting me help. That takes its own kind of strength, the wisdom to accept help when it's needed. Her words eased something in Caleb's chest, some knot of shame and failure that had been tightening since Grace's death. Lily had finished feeding and was sleeping deeply now, her face relaxed in a way it hadn't been for days. Eleanor gently wiped the baby's mouth with the corner of the blanket, her movements tender and practiced. She'll sleep for a while now, she said. You should rest too, while you can. The sound of hoofbeats broke the morning stillness, pulling Caleb from a deep sleep. He moved quickly to the window and saw a rider approaching, Ezra Montgomery, his nearest neighbor from 5 miles down the valley. Ezra was in his 60s, a taciturn widower who had been working this land since before Caleb was born. His arrival now, barely a day after the worst of the storm had passed, meant he'd been worried enough to risk the hazardous ride. Caleb glanced toward the bedroom door, still ajar. He could hear no movement from within. Eleanor and Lily were likely still asleep. How would he explain a young woman's presence to a neighbor who knew he was a recent widower? Before he could decide, a knock sounded at the door. Ezra, he said, stepping back to allow the older man entry. Wasn't expecting visitors so soon after the storm. Ezra stomped snow from his boots and entered, his weathered face etched with concern. Came to check on you and the little one, he said without preamble. Storm was a bad one. Worried when I saw that sign at your gate. His sharp eyes took in the room, noting the extra cup on the table, the woman's cloak hanging by the fire. Caleb saw the moment understanding dawned in the older man's expression. You have company, Ezra stated, his tone carefully neutral. Yes, Caleb replied, seeing no point in denial. A traveler caught in the storm. She's helping with Lily. Ezra's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. Helping? Lily was failing, Ezra, Caleb said quietly. Wouldn't take a bottle, was wasting away. Ms. Winters arrived just in time. She recently lost a child of her own. She's able to feed Lily. Understanding softened Ezra's features. A wet nurse, I said. Providence, that. Mr. Morgan. Both men turned toward the bedroom doorway where Eleanor stood with Lily in her arms. She had dressed in one of Grace's simple day dresses, her dark hair loosely braided over one shoulder. Ms. Winters, Caleb said. This is my neighbor, Ezra Montgomery. He rode over to check on us after the storm. Ma'am, Ezra said, touching the brim of his hat respectfully. His gaze moved to Lily and his expression warmed. The little one looks better already. She's stronger this morning, Eleanor confirmed, stepping further into the room. She's had 3 good feedings since I arrived. Thank the Lord for that, Ezra said sincerely. Been worried about this one? He nodded toward Caleb. Losing Grace hit him hard, and then the baby failing. I understand, Eleanor said softly. Loss has a way of compounding itself. Something in her tone made Ezra look at her more closely. You've known your share, he observed. My husband and son, she confirmed simply. Recently. Ezra nodded, a world of understanding in the gesture. Then perhaps you being here is good for both of you, he said, glancing between Eleanor and Caleb. And for the little one, of course. Lily chose that moment to stir, making small hungry sounds against Eleanor's shoulder. She's ready to eat again, Eleanor said, a faint flush coloring her cheeks. If you'll excuse me, she retreated to the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. Caleb turned to find Ezra watching him with an unreadable expression. Coffee, Caleb offered, moving to the stove. Wouldn't say no, Ezra replied, settling into a chair at the table. Caleb busied himself with the coffee pot, aware of Ezra's assessing gaze on his back. The older man had been a friend to both him and Grace, one of the few neighbors who had regularly visited Whispering Pines despite the distance. She seems a respectable woman, Ezra said after a moment. Though folks might talk, her being here like this. Let them, Caleb replied, more sharply than he'd intended. Lily's alive because of her. Nothing else matters. Ezra nodded slowly. To you and me, perhaps. But you know how people are, Caleb. Especially in a place like Redemption Creek. They'll see a young widow living with a widower and draw their own conclusions. Caleb handed Ezra a cup of coffee and sat across from him. She's only just arrived, Ezra. We haven't discussed, Arrangements. How long she'll stay. But you want her to stay, Ezra observed shrewdly. For Lily's sake, at least. Of course, Caleb admitted. Lily needs her. What he didn't say was how much he had come to need Eleanor's presence as well. The quiet competence she showed with Lily. The understanding in her eyes when he spoke of Grace. The way the empty cabin felt like a home again, with her in it. Just be careful, Ezra warned gently. Of your reputation, yes, but more importantly, of your heart. And hers. You're both raw with grief, and that can make for complicated feelings. It's not like that, Caleb protested, though even as he spoke, he wondered if it might become so, given time. Ezra merely sipped his coffee, his expression knowing. I've lived long enough to see how these things go, he said. Just proceed with caution, is all I'm saying. From the bedroom came the soft sound of Eleanor humming to Lily, a gentle melody that seemed to fill the empty spaces of the cabin. Caleb closed his eyes, listening, allowing himself to imagine for just a moment what it might be like to hear that sound every day. The thought brought both comfort and guilt. It felt like a betrayal of Grace, of the life they had built together. And yet, Grace was gone and Lily needed more than a grieving father could provide alone. One step at a time, he told himself. First, ensure Lily's survival, then figure out what came next. For now, that would have to be enough. The days following Eleanor's arrival settled into a rhythm as natural as it was unexpected. Each morning, Caleb would wake before dawn to tend to the animals in the barn, checking the horses, milking the goat, making sure the small hen house was secure against the winter predators. By the time he returned to the cabin, Eleanor would be up with Lily, seated in the rocking chair by the fire, the baby nursing contentedly at her breast. It was a domestic scene that brought both comfort and confusion to Caleb. Comfort in seeing his daughter thriving, growing stronger with each passing day. Confusion in the strange intimacy they now shared. Strangers bound by circumstance and necessity, yet living in a proximity usually reserved for family. I should ride to town today, Caleb said one morning, a week after Eleanor's arrival. The worst of the storm had passed, though the snow still lay thick across the valley. Let your sister know you're safe. Pick up supplies. Eleanor looked up from where she sat with Lily. The baby had finished nursing and now lay contentedly in her arms, eyes wide and alert, in a way Caleb had feared he might never see again. Victoria will be worried, Eleanor admitted, though her tone suggested this was more statement of fact than concern. Though I'm not sure she'll be pleased to learn where I am. I'll be discreet, Caleb promised. Just let her know you're safe, that you'll come to town when you're ready. He didn't ask when that might be. The unspoken agreement between them, that Eleanor would stay as long as Lily needed her, hung in the air, acknowledged but not examined too closely by either of them. Thank you, Eleanor said simply. She hesitated, then added, there's something else you should know before you speak to Victoria. Caleb paused in the midst of pulling on his heavy coat, noting the tension that had entered her voice. What is it? She may tell you things about me, about what happened after William died. Eleanor's gaze dropped to Lily, her fingers absently stroking the baby's dark hair. She believed I was unwell, mentally. You mentioned the asylum, Caleb said carefully. Eleanor nodded. Victoria will likely say I was delusional, that I couldn't accept William's death, that I was a danger to myself. She looked up, meeting Caleb's eyes with unexpected fierceness. I wasn't. I was grieving. Yes. Devastated. Yes, but not mad. The vehemence in her tone took Caleb by surprise. I believe you, he said simply. Relief washed over Eleanor's face, and Caleb realized how much it had cost her to tell him this, to risk his judgment, his fear, his potential rejection. Victoria means well, Eleanor continued, her voice steadier now. She always has, but she believes in order, in propriety, in managing problems rather than understanding them. When I couldn't simply get better, she decided something must be truly wrong with me. Grief doesn't follow schedules, Caleb said quietly, thinking of his own ongoing struggle. The days when he could barely rise from bed, the nights spent staring at Grace's empty side of the mattress. No, Eleanor agreed, it doesn't. Caleb finished buttoning his coat, his mind working through this new information. It explained Eleanor's reluctance to return to Redemption Creek, her appearance at his door in the midst of a blizzard. She hadn't just been traveling, she had been fleeing. "I'll be back before dark," he promised. "Will you and Lily be all right here alone?" Eleanor smiled, a small but genuine curving of her lips. "We'll manage," she said. "We have plenty to keep us occupied." Caleb nodded, oddly reluctant to leave despite knowing the necessity of the trip. He crossed to where Eleanor sat and, after a moment's hesitation, reached down to brush his fingers over Lily's cheek. The baby turned toward his touch, an instinctive response that made his heart clench with love. "She knows her papa," Eleanor said softly. "Thanks to you," Caleb replied. Their eyes met over Lily's head, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Gratitude on his part, acknowledgement on hers. The ride to Redemption Creek took longer than usual, the trail still partially obscured by snow despite the recent thaw. Ranger picked his way carefully through drifts and across frozen streams, his breath clouding in the cold air. Caleb used the time to think, to prepare for the conversation with Victoria Reed, to consider what Eleanor's presence at Whispering Pines might mean in the weeks to come. Redemption Creek was a small town, even by Wyoming Territory standards, a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church, a schoolhouse, a handful of stores and saloons. The Reed boarding house stood at the eastern end of town, a three-story structure with a wide porch and a sign swinging in the winter wind. Reed House, clean rooms, fair rates. Caleb tied Ranger to the hitching post and climbed the steps, his boots heavy on the wooden boards. A bell jangled overhead as he pushed open the front door, stepping into a warmly lit foyer that smelled of furniture polish and baking bread. A tall woman appeared from a back room, her face arranged in a polite smile that faltered slightly when she saw Caleb. She resembled Eleanor around the eyes, though her features were sharper, her bearing more rigid. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cultured and precise. "Mrs. Reed, I'm Caleb Morgan from Whispering Pines Ranch." He removed his hat, holding it respectfully before him. "I've come with news of your sister, Eleanor." Victoria Reed's expression changed instantly, alarm replacing curiosity. "Eleanor, is she all right? Has something happened?" "She's safe," Caleb assured her quickly. "She arrived at my ranch during the storm last week. Her horse had thrown her and she was lost in the blizzard. She found shelter with me and has been recovering since." Relief washed over Victoria's face, followed quickly by confusion, then a narrowing of her eyes that suggested suspicion. "With you? Alone?" The implication was clear, and Caleb felt a flash of irritation despite having anticipated this reaction. "Yes, ma'am, my daughter and I have been grateful for her company. Lily, my baby, has been ill, and your sister has been kind enough to help care for her while she recovers her own strength." Victoria's gaze remained sharp, assessing. "I see. And when will Eleanor be returning to town? I've been worried sick about her, disappearing as she did, especially given her condition." "She plans to stay on for a bit longer," Caleb said carefully. "She's still quite weak from her ordeal in the storm, and the roads remain difficult." This wasn't entirely true. Eleanor had shown no signs of physical weakness since that first night, but Caleb felt a surprising reluctance to encourage her departure. "Mr. Morgan," Victoria said, her voice taking on a confiding tone as she stepped closer. "I feel I should warn you, my sister is not entirely well. She suffered a terrible tragedy with the loss of her son, and her mind has not recovered. She sometimes has delusions, hears things that aren't there, becomes agitated without provocation." Caleb remembered Eleanor's warning, her fear that Victoria would paint her as unstable. "She seems perfectly sound to me, Mrs. Reed. Grief-stricken, yes, but not unsound." "Of course she would appear so," Victoria said with a small, sad smile. "Eleanor has always been adept at hiding her troubles, but I assure you the doctor in Cheyenne was quite clear. She needs specialized care, the kind only an institution can provide." "An asylum," Caleb said flatly. Victoria flinched slightly at the bluntness of the word. "A hospital," she corrected. "For nervous disorders. It's for her own good, Mr. Morgan. I was in the process of making arrangements when she fled." Caleb thought of Eleanor's gentle hands cradling Lily, her soft voice singing lullabies in the night, her clear-eyed resilience in the face of devastating loss. Whatever shadows haunted her, he had seen no evidence of the instability Victoria described. With respect, Mrs. Reed, I believe your sister is healing. Being at Whispering Pines, away from painful memories, seems to be doing her good. He chose his words carefully, unwilling to reveal the true nature of Eleanor's role in his household. Victoria's expression hardened slightly. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Morgan, but Eleanor is my responsibility. As soon as the roads are passable, I'll come for her myself. Now, if there's nothing else, the dismissal was clear. Caleb replaced his hat, nodding stiffly. I'll tell her you're well and concerned for her. Please do. Victoria's smile returned, though it didn't reach her eyes. And Mr. Morgan, be careful. My sister's grief has made her unpredictable. I would hate to see anyone else harmed by it. The warning followed Caleb as he left the boarding house, settling uncomfortably between his shoulder blades like the weight of watching eyes. He completed his errands in town, purchasing supplies, collecting mail that had accumulated during the storm, all the while turning over his conversation with Victoria in his mind. Had Eleanor truly been as unstable as her sister claimed? Or was Victoria exaggerating, perhaps even manipulating the situation to maintain control over her younger sister? Caleb couldn't be sure, but his instinct told him to trust Eleanor's version of events, colored though it might be by her own perspective. As he rode back toward Whispering Pines, the sun beginning its descent behind the western mountains, Caleb found himself increasingly anxious to return. To see Lily, yes, but also to reassure himself of Eleanor's continued presence, her safety under his roof. The cabin windows glowed with welcoming light as he approached, smoke curling from the chimney into the darkening sky. He stabled Ranger, unloaded his supplies, and trudged through the snow to the porch. Inside, he found Eleanor at the stove, stirring something that filled the cabin with the rich aroma of stew. Lily lay in her cradle nearby, awake but content, her tiny fists waving in the air. You're back, Eleanor said, looking up with a smile that faltered when she saw his expression. What is it? What did Victoria say? Caleb set his packages on the table, removing his coat and hat before answering. She's worried about you, he said carefully. Says you need care, that you weren't well when you left. Eleanor's shoulders stiffened, her hand tightening on the wooden spoon. And do you believe her? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications. Caleb moved to the cradle, looking down at Lily, who gurgled up at him with newfound energy. When he looked back at Eleanor, his decision was already made. No, he said simply, I don't. The relief that washed over Eleanor's face was palpable, her body seeming to sag slightly as tension released. Thank you, she whispered. But Eleanor, Caleb continued gently, she says she's coming for you when the road's clear. Fear flickered in Eleanor's eyes, quickly masked. I see. You don't have to go, Caleb said, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. You can stay here as long as you need to, as long as you want to. Because of Lily, Eleanor said, her tone neutral, unreadable soon. Yes, Caleb admitted, but not only because of Lily. The words hung between them, neither willing to examine their full implication. Eleanor turned back to the stove, her movements careful as she ladled stew into bowls. We should eat, she said softly, before it gets cold. They ate in companionable silence, the unspoken agreement to set aside difficult truths for the moment, creating a temporary peace. After dinner, as they sat before the fire, Caleb found his gaze drawn not to the flames but to Eleanor, silhouetted against the hearth with Lily nursing quietly at her breast. The flickering light transformed her profile, casting her in an almost ethereal glow that reminded him of paintings he'd once seen in a Denver museum. Madonna and Child, serene amidst chaos. What struck him most wasn't her beauty, though that was undeniable, but the quiet strength emanating from her. How she'd taken the shattered pieces of her life and fashioned them into something that could still give, rather than only take. There was wisdom in her eyes that hadn't been there when she'd first arrived, a certainty in her movements that spoke of healing rather than just surviving. Whatever shadows Victoria claimed haunted Eleanor's mind, whatever grief still visited her in the night, it hadn't consumed her. On the contrary, it had forged her into someone extraordinary, a woman who could face her deepest pain and still find room for compassion. Not madness, Caleb thought. Courage. And in that moment, watching her with his daughter, he felt something beyond gratitude bloom within his chest, something he wasn't yet ready to name. "Tell me about him," he said suddenly. "About William." Eleanor's hand stilled on Lily's back, surprise flickering across her face. No one had asked her about William since his death. Not like this, not as if his brief life had mattered, had meaning beyond its tragic end. "He had the most beautiful eyes," she began softly. "Blue, like the sky after a storm. And his laugh, even as tiny as he laughed so easily. Daniel used to say he had my spirit, my joy." As she spoke, her expression transformed, grief giving way to a gentle remembrance that held more love than pain. Caleb listened, offering no platitudes, no awkward sympathy, simply the gift of attention, of acknowledgement that William had lived, had been loved, had mattered. When she finally fell silent, tears glistening in her eyes but not falling, Caleb understood something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer merely strangers thrown together by circumstance, but two souls who had glimpsed each other's deepest wounds and found them familiar, comprehensible, worthy of gentle handling. "Thank you," Eleanor said quietly, "for asking, for listening." "Thank you for telling me," Caleb replied, his voice equally soft, "for trusting me with him." Lily had fallen asleep, milk-drunk and content against Eleanor's shoulder. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting the cabin in a warm, golden light that seemed to hold the winter darkness at bay. Outside, the wind whispered through pine branches, a gentle counterpoint to the silence inside. In that moment, unexpected and unlooked for, a fragile peace settled over Whispering Pines Ranch, born not of forgetting but of remembering together, of shared grief transformed, however briefly, into something like healing. Word traveled swiftly in Wyoming territory, even in winter, carried from ranch to town, from store to saloon, from church pew to kitchen table. By the time 3 weeks had passed since Eleanor's arrival at Whispering Pines, the story had grown in the telling, shaped by speculation and colored by judgment. A widower and a young widow, living together unchaperoned. A baby thriving where before it had failed. A woman who had fled from her family, who spoke to ghosts who might be unstable or worse. Each retelling added details, emphasized certain aspects, questioned motivations. Caleb and Eleanor, isolated at Whispering Pines, remained largely unaware of the growing whispers until the day 3 riders appeared at the gate. Caleb was in the barn, repairing a broken harness when he heard the horses approach. Setting aside his work, he moved to the doorway, squinting against the winter sun to make out the visitors. He recognized them immediately. Silas Jenkins, who owned the general store, Frank Poole, a rancher from the south end of the valley, and Reverend Porter, the minister at Redemption Creek's small church. An unusual grouping and one that sent a ripple of unease through Caleb's chest. "Morgan," Jenkins called, raising a hand in greeting as they dismounted. "Got a moment to talk?" "Of course," Caleb replied, stepping out to meet them. "Something wrong?" The 3 men exchanged glances, a silent communication that did nothing to ease Caleb's growing discomfort. "That depends," Reverend Porter said, his voice carrying the measured tones of a man accustomed to delivering both benedictions and judgments. "We've come about a situation that has caused some concern in the community." "Situation," Caleb repeated, though he already knew with sinking certainty what this was about. "The Winters woman," Poole said bluntly, never one for diplomacy. "Living here with you, unmarried with your child." Caleb felt his jaw tighten, anger rising swift and hot in his chest. "Ms. Winters is a guest in my home," he said carefully. "She was caught in the storm and has been recovering since." "For 3 weeks?" Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "That's a mighty long recovery, Morgan." "She's helping with my daughter," Caleb said, struggling to keep his voice even. "Lily was failing without her mother's milk. Ms. Winters has been kind enough to assist during this difficult time." Understanding dawned on the men's faces, followed by varying degrees of discomfort and judgment. "A wet nurse," Reverend Porter said slowly. "I see. But not hired," Jenkins pointed out. "Not a formal arrangement. Just living here, the 2 of you alone." "With my infant daughter," Caleb reminded him sharply, "who would have died without Ms. Winters' help." "No one's questioning the child's needs," Reverend Porter said, his tone conciliatory. But surely you understand how this appears to the community. The impropriety of the arrangement. Impropriety? Caleb repeated, incredulous. My daughter was starving to death. Eleanor Winters saved her life. Where's the impropriety in that? It's not what she's doing, Morgan, Poole said. It's how it's being done. Unmarried woman living with an unmarried man, doesn't matter the reason. It's not right. Caleb looked between the three men, noting the discomfort on Jenkins' face, the righteous certainty on Reverend Porter's, the awkward shuffle of Poole's boots in the snow. They had come not as friends or neighbors, but as representatives of community standards he had unwittingly violated. What exactly are you suggesting? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The church council has met, Reverend Porter said. We feel that for the sake of propriety, and for Ms. Winters' reputation as well as your own, alternative arrangements should be made. Alternative arrangements, Caleb echoed. Either Ms. Winters should return to her sister's care in town, the minister continued, or a more permanent solution should be considered. Marriage, Jenkins clarified, though the implication had been clear. Caleb stared at them, momentarily speechless. The audacity of it, three men he barely knew, presuming to dictate the most intimate aspects of his life, of Eleanor's life, as if grief and need and the fragile healing they had found together could be regulated by community standards, by church councils, by whispered judgments. This is none of your business, he said finally, his voice low. Any of you. It becomes our business when it affects the moral character of our community, Reverend Porter replied. When children might ask questions their parents cannot answer, when standards of decency are ignored. Decency, Caleb interrupted, anger fully blooming now. Where was your decency when my wife was dying? When I buried her alone because the storm was too bad for anyone to come? When my daughter was starving and not one person in your decent community could help? The men shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet his gaze. That's not fair, Morgan, Jenkins muttered. No, Caleb agreed, it's not. None of this is fair. But here we are. We're just trying to help, Reverend Porter insisted, to prevent scandal. The scandal, Caleb said coldly, would have been letting my daughter die for the sake of appearances. He straightened, looking each man in the eye. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. You know the way back to town. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. And gentlemen, the next time you ride onto my property to discuss my private affairs, don't. The three men stood in stunned silence as Caleb walked away, his back straight, his steps measured despite the rage simmering beneath his skin. Only when he reached the cabin door did he hear them remounting, the jingle of harnesses and murmur of voices gradually fading as they rode away. Inside, Eleanor stood by the window, Lily sleeping in her cradle nearby. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with apprehension. You heard, Caleb said, not a question. She nodded. Enough. She moved away from the window, wrapping her arms around herself as if suddenly cold despite the warmth of the fire. I should go, Caleb. Back to Victoria's or somewhere. This isn't fair to you, to your reputation in the community. To hell with my reputation, Caleb said, the vehemence in his voice surprising them both. He crossed to where Lily lay sleeping, reaching down to brush a finger over her rounded cheek. No longer sunken, no longer desperately thin. Look at her, Eleanor. Really look. 3 weeks ago she was dying. Now she's thriving. Because of you. But at what cost? Eleanor asked softly. The things they're saying about you. About us. Words, Caleb dismissed. Just words. Words have power, Eleanor countered, especially in small communities like this. They can destroy a man's standing, his business, his future. And what about Lily's future? Caleb asked. What happens to her if you leave? The question hung between them, honest and brutal in its simplicity. Eleanor's gaze dropped to the sleeping baby, her expression a complex mixture of love and fear. She's stronger now, she said hesitantly. She might take a bottle again, if we tried. And if she doesn't, Caleb pressed. If she refuses like before, what then, Eleanor? Do I watch her starve again, comfort myself with the knowledge that at least the town approves of my moral character while I bury my daughter beside her mother? Eleanor flinched at the rawness in his voice. That's not fair. None of this is fair. Caleb echoed his words to the visitors. Not what happened to Grace, not what happened to Daniel and William, not this impossible choice we're facing now. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. But it's the reality we have, and I'm not willing to risk Lily's life for the sake of appearances. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the fire. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. What if there was another way? A compromise. What do you mean? I could move to the old cabin, she suggested. The one at the edge of the property, where your ranch hand used to live. It's close enough that I could still come to feed Lily, but separate enough to appease the gossips. Caleb considered the suggestion. The cabin was small, little more than a one-room shelter, but it was sound enough. With some work, it could be made comfortable for Eleanor. Would that satisfy you, he asked, studying her face. Living alone out there, coming here only to feed Lily? Eleanor met his gaze steadily. It's not about what satisfies me, Caleb. It's about what's best for Lily and for your standing in the community. And what about what's best for you? Caleb pressed, surprising in himself with how much he cared about the answer. What about your happiness, your comfort? A small, sad smile curved Eleanor's lips. I stopped expecting happiness the day I buried my son, she said quietly. But purpose, that's something different. Lily gives me purpose, Caleb. A reason to keep going. That's enough for now. The simple honesty of her words struck Caleb deeply. He recognized in her declaration the same desperate bargain he had made with himself after Grace's death. The setting aside of personal joy. The narrowing of life's purpose to mere survival, to obligation fulfilled. All right, he said finally. We'll try it your way. I'll clean up the cabin tomorrow, make it habitable for you. Relief washed over Eleanor's face, followed by something that might have been disappointment, quickly masked. Thank you, she said. It's for the best, truly. Caleb wasn't so certain, but he nodded anyway. For now, he agreed. We'll see how it works. That evening, as they sat before the fire in what had become their usual positions, Caleb in his chair, Eleanor in the rocker with Lily, a strange melancholy settled over the cabin. Though nothing had yet changed, though Eleanor still sat across from him, humming softly to his daughter, Caleb felt as if something precious was already slipping away. Will you be warm enough out there? He asked suddenly. The cabin's not as well insulated as this one. Eleanor looked up, a small smile touching her lips. I'll manage, she assured him. I'm more resilient than I look. I know you are, Caleb said, and he did know. Had seen her strength each day as she cared for Lily, as she moved through her grief without letting it consume her, as she faced the judgment of strangers without bitterness. They fell silent again, the fire crackling between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Lily had finished nursing and lay sleeping in Eleanor's arms, her tiny chest rising and falling in the deep, contented rhythm of a well-fed infant. What if they're right? Eleanor asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Victoria, the townspeople, what if I am unstable? The question caught Caleb off guard. What do you mean? Eleanor's gaze remained fixed on Lily's sleeping face. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. Caleb could have dismissed it, could have offered empty reassurances. Instead, he chose honesty. I still reach for Grace in the night, he said quietly. I still turn to tell her something, only to remember she's not there. I still expect to hear her footsteps, her voice, her laugh. He leaned forward, meeting Eleanor's gaze directly. That doesn't make me unstable, Eleanor. It makes me human. It makes me someone who loved deeply and lost terribly. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, though they didn't fall. But what if it's more than that? What if Victoria is right, and I am broken in some fundamental way? We're all broken, Caleb said simply. Every one of us. The question isn't whether we're broken, it's what we do with the pieces. He gestured to Lily. You're helping to keep my daughter alive, Eleanor. You're giving her what I couldn't. That doesn't sound like madness to me. That sounds like healing, yours and hers. A single tear escaped, tracking down Eleanor's cheek. I'm afraid, she whispered. Afraid of what will happen if I stay. Afraid of what will happen if I won't. Then we take it one day at a time, Caleb suggested gently. See what happens with the cabin arrangement. Adjust as we need to. Eleanor nodded, seeming to take comfort in the pragmatic approach. One day at a time, she echoed, her voice steadier now. I can manage that. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft flakes illuminated by the light spilling from the cabin windows. Inside, the fire popped and hissed, a counterpoint to Lily's soft breathing and the creak of the rocking chair as Eleanor moved gently back and forth. For now, at least, they had found a precarious balance, a compromise between necessity and propriety, between grief and healing, between the past they couldn't change and the future they hadn't yet dared to imagine. The old ranch hand's cabin sat at the edge of the Whispering Pines property, a simple one-room structure nestled among a stand of aspens. It had been empty since before Lily's birth, when the last hired man had moved on to more lucrative work at one of the larger cattle operations south of Redemption Creek. Caleb spent 2 days preparing it for Eleanor, replacing broken window panes, patching holes in the roof, building a new bed frame to replace the one that had collapsed under the weight of a winter's worth of snow when the previous occupant had carelessly left a window open upon his departure. He worked with single-minded focus, as if the physical labor could somehow postpone the reality of what was happening, the forced separation, the concession to gossip and judgment, the disruption of the tentative peace they had established. Eleanor, for her part, sorted through Grace's things, selecting only what she truly needed: a few dresses, a shawl, a pair of boots that were slightly too large but serviceable. She was determined to take as little as possible, to maintain the fiction that this was a temporary arrangement, a practical solution to an uncomfortable situation. On the morning Eleanor was to move to the cabin, Caleb awoke before dawn, restless and uneasy. He moved quietly through his morning chores, feeding the animals, chopping wood, pumping fresh water, all the while aware of the subtle shift happening within the main cabin, the gathering of Eleanor's few possessions, the rearrangement of space that had, however briefly, accommodated 3 lives instead of 2. When he returned from the barn, he found Eleanor at the table, Lily in her arms, a small bundle of clothing beside her. The baby was nursing contentedly, unaware of the changes about to upend her world yet again. Everything's ready at the cabin, Caleb said, removing his coat and hanging it by the door. Stove works, roof's sound, bed's sturdy enough. Thank you, Eleanor replied, not meeting his eyes. I'm sure it will be fine. The formality between them was new and uncomfortable, a regression to the careful politeness of strangers after weeks of growing familiarity. Caleb hated it, but didn't know how to bridge the sudden divide. I'll walk you over when you're ready, he offered. Carry your things. Eleanor nodded, her attention seemingly focused on Lily, though Caleb suspected she was simply avoiding his gaze. I won't be taking much, she said. Just what's here. Caleb looked at the small bundle, a few dresses, a shawl, a hairbrush, a book, the meager possessions of a woman who had fled with nothing but the clothes on her back, who had rebuilt her life from the scattered pieces of tragedy. You should take more, he insisted. The blankets from the bed, at least, the quilt. It gets cold out there at night. I'll be fine, Eleanor said, finally looking up. I don't want to impose any more than I already have. It's not an imposition, Caleb said more sharply than he intended. He trailed off, unsure how to articulate the complex tangle of emotions in his chest. Gratitude, concern, a sense of responsibility, and something else, something he wasn't yet ready to name. It's practical, Eleanor finished for him, her voice gentle. I understand, Caleb, and I appreciate it, but truly I'll be fine with just the essentials. Lily had finished nursing and lay drowsing in Eleanor's arms, milk-drunk and content. Eleanor adjusted her dress, then carefully transferred the baby to her shoulder, patting her back gently to release any trapped air. I'll be coming back several times a day anyway, she continued, her tone deliberately light. For Lily's feedings, there's no need for me to have much at the cabin. Just a place to sleep, really. The practical arrangement laid out in such stark terms struck Caleb as profoundly wrong. A cold calculation that reduced Eleanor to her function, to what her body could provide for his child. Yet he knew she was right. This was the compromise they had agreed to, the solution that might appease the town's judgment while still meeting Lily's needs. "At least take the rocking chair," he said, "for when you feed her there." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "All right," she agreed. "The rocking chair would be nice." They fell silent then, the weight of the impending separation hanging between them. Outside, the winter sun had fully risen, casting long shadows across the snow-covered yard. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth. The clock on the mantel ticked away seconds, and Lily's soft breathing punctuated the silence. "I should go," Eleanor said finally, rising carefully with Lily still in her arms. "Get settled before her next feeding." Caleb nodded, moving to collect her small bundle of possessions. "I'll carry the chair over later today," he promised, "once I've finished with the south pasture fence." Eleanor crossed to Lily's cradle, gently laying the baby down. She stood for a moment looking down at the sleeping infant, her expression a complex mixture of love and loss. Then she straightened, squaring her shoulders as if preparing for battle. "Ready?" she said simply. They walked to the cabin in silence, their breath clouding in the cold air, their boots crunching through the crusty top layer of snow. The path between the main house and the ranch hand's cabin had been rarely used in recent months, and Caleb had to break trail, Eleanor following in his footsteps. The cabin looked smaller in the daylight than Caleb remembered. A single room with a stone fireplace, a small cook stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and the newly built bed in the corner. He had swept it clean, laid a fire in the hearth, stacked wood beside the door, but it still felt barren, unwelcoming compared to the warmth of the main house. "It's perfect," Eleanor said, though Caleb detected a slight tremor in her voice. "Thank you for preparing it." He set her bundle on the bed, then stood awkwardly in the center of the room, unsure what to do with his hands, his presence suddenly intrusive in this space that was now hers. "I'll bring more firewood later," he said. "And the chair." Eleanor nodded, moving to the window to look out at the snow-covered landscape. "The view is lovely," she observed. "You can see the whole valley from here." "Grace used to say the same thing," Caleb said without thinking. "She'd come out here sometimes, to be alone, to think." Eleanor turned from the window, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to intrude on her space." "You're not," Caleb assured her quickly. She would have understood. About Lily, about all of it. Would she? Eleanor asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Would she truly have understood another woman nursing her child, living on her land, wearing her clothes? The question caught Caleb off guard with its bluntness, its honesty. He had been so focused on practical concerns, on Lily's survival, that he hadn't fully considered the emotional implications of Eleanor's presence from Grace's perspective. "Yes," he said after a moment's consideration. Grace was practical, unsentimental about such things. She would have wanted Lily to thrive no matter what. Eleanor seemed to accept this, turning back to the window. "I should start getting settled," she said. "Lily will be awake soon, hungry again." The dismissal was gentle but clear. Caleb nodded, though she wasn't looking at him. "I'll be up at the main house if you need anything," he said. "Just call." Eleanor didn't respond, and after a moment of awkward silence, Caleb turned to leave. At the door, he paused, looking back at her silhouette against the window. She looked small suddenly, fragile in a way he hadn't noticed before, and he felt a surge of protectiveness, of concern. "Eleanor," he said softly. She turned, her face in shadow now, unreadable. "This isn't right," he said, the words emerging before he could consider them. "None of this is right." A small smile, sad and knowing, curved her lips. "No," she agreed, "but it's necessary. For now." "For now," Caleb echoed, though the temporary nature of the arrangement offered little comfort. He nodded once, then stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him. The walk back to the main house seemed longer somehow, the silence more oppressive without Eleanor beside him. Inside, Lily still slept in her cradle, unaware of the changes happening around her, the compromises being made for her sake. Caleb stood looking down at his daughter, at the rounded cheeks and peaceful expression that had been so terrifyingly absent just 3 weeks ago. Eleanor had given this to Lily, this health, this contentment, this chance at life, and how had he repaid her? By banishing her to a cold cabin at the edge of his property, by bowing to the judgment of men who had never known true desperation, true grief. The unfairness of it all hit him with fresh force, and he found himself pacing the cabin, restless energy having nowhere to go. He had agreed to this arrangement for Eleanor's sake as much as his own, to protect her reputation, to shield her from gossip. But standing in the suddenly too quiet cabin, Caleb wondered if he had made the right choice after all. Back in the main cabin, the silence pressed in on Caleb like a physical weight. He moved restlessly through the rooms, touching objects that Eleanor had used. The rocking chair, a cup on the table, the blanket sheet draped over her shoulders on cold nights. His wandering brought him to the chest at the foot of the bed, where he kept Grace's personal belongings. With a hesitant hand, he lifted the lid. The faint scent of lavender rose to meet him, Grace's favorite. Beneath a folded shawl lay a leather-bound journal, its pages worn from frequent handling. He had found it after her death, but had never summoned the courage to read it until now. Caleb carried the journal to the chair by the fire, and after a moment's pause, opened to the last entry, dated just 3 days before Lily's birth. The baby moves constantly now, as if eager to meet the world. Dr. Morrison says it could be any day. I should be nothing but excited, but there's a shadow I can't seem to shake. Last night I dreamed I was standing on the porch watching Caleb teach our child to ride, but I was transparent, like a ghost. I couldn't call on to them, couldn't touch them. I woke crying. I haven't told Caleb about these feelings. He's so happy about the baby, so full of plans. What good would it do to burden him with my foolish fears? But if something happens, if this shadow that follows me proves prophetic, I want him to know this. Love again, Caleb. Our child will need a mother, and you will need companionship. Don't let loyalty to a ghost keep you from finding happiness. I would rather see you build a new life than wither alone, tending my memory like a grave. This little one deserves a family, deserves all the love this world can offer, whether I'm here to provide it or not. Promise me, Caleb. Promise me you'll do whatever it takes to give our child that chance. Caleb closed the book, his vision blurred with tears. Grace had known somehow, had sensed what was coming. And she had given her blessing for exactly what was happening now, for him to find a way forward, to create a family for Lily, even if it meant opening his heart to someone new. It felt like a message across the divide, like Grace reaching back to guide him through this impossible choice. The knowledge steadied him, gave him clarity. He would not let Eleanor be driven away, would not let Victoria or the town's judgment separate them. Grace would have understood. Grace, in fact, had understood before any of them. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He crossed the room quickly, hope rising that perhaps Eleanor had changed her mind, had returned to the main house. But when he opened the door, it was Ezra Montgomery who stood on the porch, his weathered face grave beneath his snow-dusted hat. Caleb, the older man greeted him. Got a moment to talk? Ezra, Caleb replied, stepping back to allow his neighbor entry. Come in. Ezra stomped snow from his boots, then entered, his sharp eyes taking in the cabin. Noting Caleb was sure the absence of Eleanor's presence, the subtle rearrangement of space. She's gone, Ezra observed, not a question. To the ranch hand's cabin, Caleb clarified. Not away entirely. She's still helping with Lily. Ezra nodded slowly, removing his hat. Heard about the visit you had, Porter and his moral committee. News travels fast, Caleb said dryly. Always does, Ezra agreed. He moved to the fire, warming his hands. So you gave in to them. There was no judgment in the statement, just a flat acknowledgement of fact, but Caleb felt defensive nonetheless. It seemed best for everyone involved, he said, for Eleanor's reputation as much as mine. Ezra made a non-committal sound, more grunt than word. And the baby? How's she taking to the new arrangement? She doesn't know yet, Caleb admitted. Eleanor just moved this morning. She'll be back for feedings throughout the day. Like a hired nurse, Ezra observed, coming and going at appointed times. The description, accurate though it was, made Caleb uncomfortable. It's not like that, he protested. Eleanor she's a friend. She's helping because she wants to, because she cares about Lily. And about you? Ezra asked, his gaze sharp beneath bushy brows. Caleb looked away, unwilling to examine that question too closely. We've both been through a lot, he said carefully. We understand each other's grief. That's all. Is it? Ezra asked. Then before Caleb could respond, he waved a hand dismissively. Never mind, not my business. I just came to tell you I heard talk in town. Victoria Reed's been asking questions about you, about your situation here. Seems she's not satisfied with her sister living out at Whispering Pines, even in a separate cabin. Alarm prickled along Caleb's spine. What kind of questions? About your character mostly. Whether you're a man of good standing, whether you've ever had troubles with the law, with women, with drink. Ezra's expression was grave. She's building a case, Caleb, trying to paint you as unsuitable, maybe even dangerous. That's ridiculous, Caleb protested. I've never given anyone reason to think. I know that, Ezra interrupted, and most folks in town know it too. But Victoria Reed has influence, money, connections in Cheyenne. If she's determined to get Eleanor back under her roof, she might not be too particular about how she does it. The implication was clear and deeply disturbing. Caleb sank into a chair, trying to process this new threat. "Waya?" he asked, more to himself than to Ezra. "Why is she so determined to control Eleanor's life?" Ezra shrugged, taking the seat opposite. "Can't say for certain, but I've seen it before. People who can't abide others, making choices different from their own. Who believe they know what's best, who can't tolerate the messiness of grief, of healing in ways they don't understand." Caleb thought of Eleanor's fears, her belief that Victoria truly thought she was unstable, in need of institutionalization. Could that be true? Or was there something else driving Victoria's determination to reclaim her sister? "What should I do?" he asked, looking up at Ezra. The older man's weathered face softened slightly. "That depends," he said, "on what you want, Caleb. And I don't think you've figured that out yet yourself." Before Caleb could respond, Lily stirred in her cradle, making small sounds that would soon become full-fledged cries of hunger. Ezra rose, putting on his hat. "Think about it," he advised, moving toward the door. "And talk to Eleanor. She deserves to know what her sister's doing." Caleb nodded, already crossing to Lily's cradle. "Thank you for the warning," he said. "I appreciate it." Ezra paused at the door, looking back at Caleb with an expression that mingled concern and a strange sort of hope. "You know," he said slowly, "sometimes the most unconventional choices are the right ones. I learned that the hard way, long ago." There was a story there, Caleb knew, but Ezra rarely spoke of his past, of the life he'd had before Wyoming territory. Before Caleb could ask, Lily's cries became more insistent, demanding attention. "I'll let you tend to the little one," Ezra said. "Give my regards to Ms. Winters." With that, he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the suddenly too empty cabin. Caleb lifted Lily, cradling her against his chest as her cries grew more desperate. "Shh, little one," he soothed, though he knew what she wanted, what she needed, was not something he could provide. "Let's go find Eleanor." Snow crunched beneath Caleb's boots as he carried Lily across the yard toward the ranch hand's cabin. Her cries, muffled against his shoulder, grew more insistent with each step. The path he had broken earlier was already filling with fresh snow, the day's gentle flurries erasing evidence of their passage. Smoke curled from the cabin's chimney, a reassuring sign that Eleanor had managed to get the fire going. As Caleb approached, he could see her silhouette through the frost-edged window, moving about the small space, arranging her meager belongings. He knocked softly, conscious of how strange it felt to announce his presence at a door on his own property. "Come in," Eleanor called, her voice muffled by the thick wooden door. Caleb stepped inside, the warmth of the cabin a welcome contrast to the winter chill. Eleanor stood by the fire, her face flushed from the heat, her dark hair loosely braided over one shoulder. She had changed into one of Grace's dresses, the blue one that had always been Caleb's favorite, though he pushed that thought aside. "She's hungry," he said unnecessarily, as Lily's cries made her needs abundantly clear. "I heard her from here," Eleanor said with a small smile, already moving to take the baby from his arms. "Right on schedule." Their hands brushed during the transfer, a momentary contact that sent an unexpected warmth through Caleb's chest. He stepped back, suddenly awkward in the small space. "I'll, leave you to it then," he said, turning toward the door. "You don't have to go," Eleanor said quickly, settling into the straight-back chair by the fire. It looked uncomfortable compared to the rocking chair she was accustomed to, and Caleb made a mental note to bring it over as soon as possible. There's coffee on the stove, if you'd like some. The invitation surprised him on a small gesture of hospitality in what was, after all, his own cabin on his own land. But he understood what Eleanor was doing, establishing boundaries, creating a space that was hers, however temporarily. Thank you, he said, moving to the small stove where a pot of coffee simmered. He poured a cup, then stood uncertainly, watching as Eleanor adjusted her dress and positioned Lily to nurse. Ezra Montgomery stopped by, he said after a moment, leaning against the rough-hewn table. He had some concerning news from town. Eleanor looked up, alarm flickering across her face. What kind of news? It's Victoria, Caleb said, deciding directness was best. She's been asking questions about me in town, about my character, my reputation. Eleanor's hand stilled on Lily's back. What kind of questions? Whether I've had troubles with the law, with women, with drink. Caleb took a sip of coffee, using the moment to choose his next words carefully. Ezra thinks she's building a case against me, trying to paint me as unsuitable or even dangerous, to justify taking you back to town. Fear washed over Eleanor's face, quickly masked. She wouldn't, she whispered, but there was no conviction in her tone. Wouldn't she? Caleb asked gently. You've said yourself she was trying to have you committed before you fled. Eleanor looked down at Lily, her expression troubled. She believes she's protecting me, she said softly. That's always been her way, deciding what's best for everyone around her, controlling situations, managing problems. Is that what you are to her? A problem to be managed? Caleb couldn't keep the edge from his voice, anger rising at the thought of Victoria's manipulation. Not intentionally, Eleanor sighed. But Victoria has always needed order, structure. After our parents died, she took charge of everything, our finances, our education, our futures. She means well, truly she does, but she can't understand messiness, grief that doesn't follow proper stages, healing that looks like breaking before it looks like mending. The insight into Victoria's character helped explain her actions, but did nothing to alleviate Caleb's concern. What will she do, Eleanor, if she can't persuade you to return voluntarily? Eleanor met his gaze, her blue-gray eyes shadowed with worry. I don't know, she admitted. Before, when William died, she had medical authority. I was living under her roof, dependent on her care. But now, she shook her head. I'm afraid she might try to have me declared incompetent, to become my legal guardian. The prospect sent a chill through Caleb that had nothing to do with the winter weather. Could she do that? Possibly, Eleanor said, with the right doctor, the right judge. Money can be persuasive, and Victoria has plenty of it from her late husband's business interests. She stroked Lily's dark hair absently, her gaze distant. If she convinced the authorities I was a danger to myself or others. But you're not, Caleb said firmly. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with you can see that. A small, sad smile curved Eleanor's lips. Grief can look like madness from the outside, Caleb, especially women's grief. It makes people uncomfortable, makes them want to control it, contain it, put it away somewhere it won't disturb their orderly view of the world. The insight struck Caleb with its simple truth. He thought of his own grief after Grace's death, the raw animal pain of it, the moments of rage, of despair, of near madness. But no one had suggested he be institutionalized. No one had questioned his right to continue living, working, raising his child, despite his broken heart. It's not fair, he said, knowing how inadequate the words were. No, Eleanor agreed, but it's reality. She adjusted Lily, who had finished feeding at one breast and was now rooting for the other. The question is, what do we do about it? The we caught Caleb's attention, a small but significant acknowledgement that they were in this situation together. Bound by circumstances neither had chosen, but both now navigated. We could leave, he suggested, the thought forming even as he spoke it. Take Lily and go somewhere Victoria couldn't reach us. Start fresh. Surprise flashed across Eleanor's face. Leave? Abandon Whispering Pines? Your home? Grace's home? It's just land, Caleb said. though he knew it was more than that. It was 7 years of work, of dreams, of memories. It was the future he and Grace had planned together. Lily is what matters, and you. The last words slipped out unbidden, hanging in the air between them. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, and Caleb found himself unable to look away, unable to take back the truth he hadn't meant to reveal. "Caleb," she began, but was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door, forceful, demanding, nothing like Caleb's tentative tap earlier. They froze, exchanging a glance of alarm. No one besides Ezra knew Eleanor was staying in the ranch hand's cabin. No one except the 3 men who had visited earlier. "Mr. Morgan?" a woman's voice called, cultured and authoritative. "I know you're in there. I insist you open this door immediately." Victoria Reed. Caleb set down his coffee cup and moved to the door, positioning himself between it and Eleanor, as if he could physically shield her from what was coming. He opened the door just enough to see Victoria standing on the porch, wrapped in an expensive fur coat, her face flushed with cold and indignation. "Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice deliberately neutral, "this is unexpected." "I imagine it is," Victoria replied, her gaze sweeping past him to where Eleanor sat with Lily. "Though perhaps less unexpected than finding my sister living in a servant's quarters on your property, half-dressed and nursing your child." The deliberate mischaracterization of the situation made Caleb's jaw tighten, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Please come in," he said, stepping back. "It's too cold to have this conversation on the porch." Victoria entered, her expensive boots leaving wet marks on the wooden floor. She was a striking woman, tall and elegant, with the same blue-gray eyes as Eleanor, but none of her sister's gentleness. Her gaze was sharp, assessing, moving from Eleanor to Caleb with undisguised judgment. "What are you doing here, Victoria?" Eleanor asked, her voice steadier than Caleb had expected. She had adjusted her dress, covering herself now that Lily had finished nursing, but made no move to rise or to hand the baby to Caleb. "Rescuing you, apparently," Victoria replied, removing her gloves with precise movements. "Though I'm beginning to think I'm too late. What have you done to yourself, Eleanor? Living in this hovel, exposing yourself to a man who is not your husband, allowing yourself to be used as a common wet nurse?" The contempt in her voice made Caleb's hands curl into fists at his sides, but Eleanor merely looked tired. "I'm helping a child survive, Victoria, a motherless infant who would have died without me." Her voice was quiet but firm. "And in doing so, I'm helping myself survive as well. Is that so difficult to understand?" "It's inappropriate," Victoria snapped. "It's scandalous. It's beneath your dignity as a widow of standing, as a member of our family." "My dignity," Eleanor repeated, a flash of genuine anger crossing her face. "Was it dignified when you tried to have me committed, when you had Dr. Simmons declare me unfit to manage my own affairs? When you began liquidating my property without my consent?" The accusations hung in the air, shocking in their directness. Caleb looked between the sisters, sensing years of complicated history beneath the current conflict. "I was trying to protect you," Victoria said, her voice slightly less certain. "You were unwell, Eleanor, unstable. You refused to eat, to sleep. You wandered the house at night, talking to William as if he were still alive. What was I supposed to do? Watch you destroy yourself?" "You were supposed to support me," Eleanor said quietly. "To let me grieve in my own way, in my own time. To trust that I would find my way back to living, even if it didn't look the way you thought it should." Victoria's expression hardened. "And is this what finding your way back to living looks like? Living in a shack on a failing ranch, giving your milk to another woman's child, allowing yourself to be used by a man who clearly sees you as nothing more than a convenient solution to his problem?" The unfairness of the accusation made Caleb step forward, unable to remain silent any longer. "That's not true," he said, his voice low with controlled anger. "Eleanor saved my daughter's life. She continues to do so every day. My gratitude and respect for her have nothing to do with convenience and everything to do with her courage, her compassion, her strength." Victoria's gaze shifted to him, cold and calculating. "How noble," she said, her tone making the word an insult. "And I suppose your insistence on keeping her here, isolated from her family, from proper society, has nothing to do with the fact that without her, your child might die?" The blunt truth of it struck Caleb like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. What could he say? It was true. Without Eleanor, Lily might well die. The knowledge had shaped every decision he'd made since that snowy night when Eleanor had appeared at his door. It's not like that, he said finally, but the words sounded weak even to his own ears. Isn't it? Victoria pressed. You need her, Mr. Morgan. For your daughter's sake, you need her to stay, which gives you every reason to encourage this arrangement, regardless of what's best for Eleanor. And you know what's best for me? Eleanor asked, rising from her chair with Lily still in her arms. Her voice was stronger now, her bearing straighter. You who tried to marry me off to Nathan Blackwell when I was still in mourning for Daniel? You who began arranging my commitment when I wouldn't comply with your plans for my future? Victoria flinched slightly, the accusations finding their mark. I was trying to secure your future, she insisted, to find you a respectable position, a husband who could provide for you, who could help you move past your grief. Nathan Blackwell is twice my age and has buried 3 wives already, Eleanor said flatly. He wanted my inheritance, not me, and you knew that. The revelation made Caleb look at Victoria with new understanding and new suspicion. There was more at stake here than a sister's well-being. There was money, property, control. This isn't about my mental state, is it? Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. It's about the trust Father left me, the money you can't access unless I'm declared incompetent or unless I marry someone willing to make arrangements with you. Victoria's face flushed, though whether from anger or embarrassment, Caleb couldn't tell. That's unfair, Eleanor. I've only ever wanted what's best for you. No, Eleanor said quietly. You've wanted what's best for you, what's most convenient, what causes the least disruption to your orderly life. She shifted Lily to her shoulder, patting the baby's back gently. But life isn't orderly, Victoria. It's messy and painful and beautiful. All at once, I'm learning that again. Here with Lily, with Caleb. The inclusion of his name in her declaration sent a warmth through Caleb's chest, an unexpected lightness amid the tension of the confrontation. Victoria's gaze moved from Eleanor to Caleb, her expression calculating. I see, she said, her voice cooling to ice. So that's how it is. You've replaced one family with another, just like that. Substituted this man's child for your own dead son. The cruelty of the words made Caleb step forward, but Eleanor raised a hand, stopping him. No, she said, her voice remarkably steady despite the paleness of her face. I haven't replaced William. Nothing and no one will ever replace my son. But I've found a purpose again, a reason to continue living. And yes, that purpose involves Lily, and it involves Caleb. Not as replacements, but as new connections, new reasons to heal. She moved to stand beside Caleb, Lily still in her arms, presenting a united front that made Victoria's eyes narrow. You're making a terrible mistake, Victoria said, reaching for her gloves. One you'll regret when the novelty of playing house wears off, when the reality of your situation becomes clear. What future can you possibly have here, Eleanor? As a widow living in a servant's quarters, nursing another woman's child? What happens when the baby is weaned, when she no longer needs you? Will Mr. Morgan still want you around then, I wonder? The questions were calculated to wound, to plant seeds of doubt, and Caleb saw them hit their mark in the flicker of uncertainty that passed across Eleanor's face. Before he could respond, Victoria continued, her voice softening to something almost kind, almost concerned. Come home with me, Eleanor. Let me help you, truly help you this time. No asylum, no doctors, I promise. Just a comfortable home, respectable society, time to heal properly. To find your way forward in a manner befitting your station, your upbringing. For a moment, Caleb thought Eleanor might waver, might give in to the familiar patterns of her relationship with her sister. But then Lily stirred against Eleanor's shoulder, making a small sound of contentment, and Eleanor's resolve seemed to strengthen. No, she said simply, my place is here, for now, with Lily, with Caleb. Victoria's face hardened. Then you leave me no choice, she said, pulling on her gloves with sharp, decisive movements. I had hoped to avoid legal proceedings, but if you insist on this unconventional arrangement, I will be forced to take steps to protect you from yourself. What kind of steps? Caleb asked, alarm rising at the threat in Victoria's tone. I've already consulted with Judge Harrington in Cheyenne, Victoria replied, her voice coldly triumphant. He agrees that Eleanor's behavior since William's death, the sleepwalking, the delusions, the irrational decisions, suggests she may not be competent to manage her own affairs. Add to that this situation, living unchaperoned with a widower, acting as wet nurse to his child. Well, she smiled thinly, the case for guardianship becomes quite compelling. Eleanor paled, her hand tightening on Lily's back. You wouldn't, she whispered. I would, Victoria confirmed. To protect you, yes, but also to protect what father left you. Your inheritance, your good name, your place in society. All the things you seem determined to throw away in this misguided attempt at healing. She moved to the door, pausing with her hand on the latch. I'll give you 2 days, Eleanor. 2 days to come to your senses, to return to Redemption Creek of your own accord. After that, I'll have no choice but to proceed with legal action. With that, she was gone, the door closing behind her with a finality that seemed to echo in the small cabin. Eleanor stood frozen, her face ashen, until Lily began to fuss, sensing the tension in the air. She can't do this, Caleb said, though he wasn't sure that was true. The law gave men tremendous power over their wives, brothers over their sisters, particularly when questions of mental competence arose. She can't just have you declared incompetent because you've made choices she doesn't agree with. She can try, Eleanor said quietly, moving to sit on the edge of the bed, Lily cradled against her chest. And she might succeed, Caleb. Victoria has connections, influence, and what I did after William died, it could be interpreted as instability, especially by a judge who's predisposed to see women's grief as a form of hysteria. Caleb sank into the chair by the fire, trying to process the implications of Victoria's threat. What exactly happened, Eleanor? After William died? Eleanor was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on Lily's face. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. After William died, the line between memory and reality blurred for me, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't accept that he was truly gone. Caleb nodded, understanding evident in his face. Grief does that to us, he said quietly. After Grace, there were moments I was certain I heard her voice, felt her presence. Eleanor met his gaze, gratitude in her eyes for his understanding. Victoria found me that night in a state she couldn't comprehend, she continued. The nursery was in disarray, and I was inconsolable. That was when she decided I needed to be managed rather than understood. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. Caleb could have pulled away, could have seen in it confirmation of Victoria's claims about Eleanor's instability. Instead, he leaned forward, reaching for her hand. Grief does strange things to us, he said softly. Makes us believe impossible things. Makes us rage against reality. That doesn't make you unstable, Eleanor. It makes you human. Eleanor's fingers curled around his, warm and surprisingly strong. Victoria doesn't see it that way, she said. She sees order, control, proper behavior. Anything that falls outside those boundaries frightens her. What will you do? Caleb asked, though he was already dreading her answer. Will you go back to her? Eleanor was silent for a long moment, her gaze shifting from their joined hands to Lily's sleeping face. I don't know, she said finally. If I stay, she'll bring legal action, try to have me declared incompetent. If she succeeds, her voice faltered. If she succeeds, you could be committed against your will, Caleb finished for her, the possibility sending a cold dread through his chest. Sent to that asylum in Cheyenne. Eleanor nodded, her face pale but composed. And if I go back to her, submit to her authority, let her control my life, my decisions. She shook her head. That's its own kind of imprisonment, Caleb. Perhaps less terrible than an asylum, but an imprisonment nonetheless. The choice seemed impossible. Risk legal commitment or accept a different kind of confinement under Victoria's control. Caleb's mind raced, seeking a third option, an escape from the trap closing around them. We could still leave, he suggested, the idea taking firmer shape in his mind. Tonight. Pack what we need, take the wagon, head west to Montana Territory or north to Dakota, somewhere Victoria's influence doesn't reach, somewhere we could start fresh. Eleanor looked up, surprise mingling with a hesitant hope in her eyes. You would do that? Leave Whispering Pines, everything you've built here? For Lily's life? For your freedom? Caleb squeezed her hand gently. Yes, Eleanor, I would. The simplicity of his answer seemed to touch her deeply. She looked down at Lily, sleeping peacefully against her chest, then back at Caleb, her expression softening. You're a good man, Caleb Morgan, she said quietly. Better than I deserve, given the trouble I've brought to your door. You've brought life to my door, Caleb corrected her. Hope, a future where before there was only grief and despair. The words came easily, naturally, truths he had been avoiding acknowledging even to himself. Whatever happens next, Eleanor, I will never regret the night you appeared in that blizzard. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes, though they didn't fall. Nor will I, she whispered. They sat in silence then, hands still joined, while outside the wind picked up, winter asserting itself once more against the brief afternoon thaw. Inside the small cabin, a decision hovered, unspoken but forming, a choice that would alter 3 lives irrevocably, for better or worse. We should prepare, Eleanor said finally, her voice steadier now, her decision apparently made. If we're to leave tonight, there's much to be done. Caleb nodded, a mixture of relief and apprehension washing through him. I'll ready the wagon, pack supplies. We'll need warm blankets for Lily, food for the journey. I don't have much to bring, Eleanor said, looking around the sparse cabin. Just what you see here. We'll start fresh, Caleb promised, rising from his chair. All of us. As he turned to leave to begin preparations for their flight, Eleanor's voice stopped him. Caleb? He looked back to find her watching him, a question in her eyes that she seemed afraid to ask. What is it? He prompted gently. This decision, to leave with me, to start over somewhere new. She hesitated, vulnerability evident in every line of her face. Are you certain? Truly certain? Not just for Lily's sake, but for your own? The question deserved honesty, required it. Caleb moved back to where she sat, kneeling before her so they were at eye level, Lily sleeping between them. I'm certain, he said, his voice low and steady. Not just for Lily, not just for you, for all of us, Eleanor. For the chance at something I never thought I'd find again after Grace died. A family, a home, a reason to wake up each morning with hope instead of dread. The simple declaration hung between them, honest and unadorned. Eleanor's eyes searched his, looking for doubt, for hesitation, finding none. All right, she said softly. Then we go. Tonight. Darkness fell early, the winter sun surrendering to night before 5 o'clock. Caleb moved through the main cabin with quiet efficiency, packing only what they truly needed. Warm clothing, food, medicine for Lily, the tools essential for starting over in a new place. He left Grace's silver hairbrush on the dresser, her wedding ring in its small wooden box, her books arranged neatly on the shelf. These things belonged to Whispering Pines, to the life he had built with her. Where he was going now, with Eleanor, with Lily, would be different. Not a replacement for what he had lost, but something new, something he was only beginning to understand. He hitched the horses to the wagon, covering the bed with a canvas tarp to protect their belongings from the snow that had begun to fall again as evening deepened. Inside the barn, the animals watched with mild curiosity as he moved about, selecting which to take, which to leave behind. The milk goat would come. Lily might need it if for any reason Eleanor's milk should fail. One horse to pull the wagon, one to ride alongside. The rest he would have to leave, trusting that Ezra would find them eventually, would understand what had happened and why they had fled. Leaving Whispering Pines felt both like a betrayal and a liberation. This land had been his dream, his and Grace's, a future they had planned together, built together. Yet now it felt like a prison, its boundaries defined by the judgments of others, by Victoria's threats, by the narrowing possibilities for Eleanor's freedom and Lily's survival. As he secured the last of their supplies, Caleb heard the crunch of boots on snow. He turned to find Ezra standing in the barn doorway, his weathered face grave in the lantern light. Leaving then, the older man said, not a question. Caleb nodded, unsurprised that Ezra had deduced his plans. Tonight, Victoria Reed is trying to have Eleanor declared incompetent to force her back to town. If she succeeds, Eleanor could be committed to that asylum in Cheyenne. Ezra's expression darkened. The woman's that determined, is she? It's about money as much as control, Caleb explained. Eleanor has an inheritance her sister can't access unless Eleanor is declared incompetent or marries someone willing to cooperate with Victoria. And you're not willing to be that someone, Ezra observed shrewdly. The implication caught Caleb off guard. He hadn't considered marriage as an alternative to flight, though now that Ezra mentioned it, the idea seemed obvious. If Eleanor were his wife, her sister would have no legal authority over her. Victoria's attempts to have her committed would be thwarted. I hadn't thought of that, he admitted. Hadn't you? Ezra's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. Seems the simplest solution, if you're both agreeable. Certainly easier than abandoning everything you have built here. Caleb shook his head, though the seed of the idea had taken root. It's too soon, he said. For both of us. Grace has been gone barely 2 months. Eleanor's still mourning her son, her husband. And yet you're willing to flee together, to start a new life elsewhere. Ezra's tone held no judgment, just a calm observation of facts. Seems to me the form matters less than the substance, Caleb. You're already choosing each other, choosing to be a family of sorts. The rest is just paperwork and ceremony. Put that way, it made a certain stark sense. Caleb paused in his preparations, considering the alternative Ezra presented. Marriage would solve the legal problem neatly, would place Eleanor firmly beyond Victoria's reach. But it would also bind them together in ways neither had anticipated when Eleanor appeared at his door that snowy night. I can't ask that of her, Caleb said finally. It's too much, too fast. Have you asked her what she wants? Ezra countered. Or are you deciding for her just as her sister tries to do? The question struck home, forcing Caleb to examine his own assumptions, his own protectiveness. Was he any better than Victoria, making decisions about Eleanor's life without consulting her fully? The thought was uncomfortable, challenging. I should talk to her, he conceded. Present all the options. You should, Ezra agreed. He paused, then added more gently. For what it's worth, I think you'd be making a mistake to leave, Caleb. This place, it's more than land and buildings. It's your home. It's where Grace's memory lives. Do you really want to abandon that? The question pierced deeper than Ezra could have known, touching the guilt Caleb had been trying to ignore. The sense that leaving Whispering Pines meant leaving Grace behind, meant failing to honor her memory, her dreams for this place. I don't know what else to do, he admitted, the words rough with emotion. I can't let Victoria take Eleanor. I can't watch Lily starve again if Eleanor's milk dries up from the stress of fighting this battle. Then consider what I've suggested, Ezra said. Talk to Eleanor. See if there's a way to stay and fight rather than flee. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. Whatever you decide, you have my support, Caleb. Remember that. With that, he was gone, his footsteps fading into the night, leaving Caleb alone with his thoughts and the quiet sounds of the animals settling for the night. The walk to the ranch hand's cabin seemed longer than usual, the snow deeper, the wind sharper against his face. Or perhaps it was just the weight of the decision before him, the alternative Ezra had presented that now demanded consideration. Light spilled from the cabin windows, warm and inviting against the darkness. Caleb knocked softly, then entered to find Eleanor sitting by the fire, Lily in her arms. She had packed her few belongings, the borrowed dresses, the shawl, the book, into a small bundle that sat by the door. Her face was composed, resolute, but Caleb could see the fear beneath, the uncertainty she was trying to mask for his sake, for Lily's. The wagon's ready, he said, closing the door against the cold. We can leave as soon as Lily's finished feeding. Eleanor nodded, her gaze returning to the baby at her breast. I've packed what little I have, she said, though it seems wrong, somehow, to take Grace's things with me. They're yours now, Caleb assured her. Grace would want you to have them, to be warm, to be comfortable. A small smile flickered across Eleanor's face. You speak of her often, she observed, of what she would want, what she would think. I like that. It means you haven't tried to forget her, to erase her from your life. I couldn't, Caleb said simply. She's part of me, part of Lily. Always will be. Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. As Daniel is part of me, as William is. She stroked Lily's dark hair gently. We carry them with us, wherever we go, even if we leave this place behind. The sentiment, so closely aligned with his own thoughts, gave Caleb courage to broach the alternative that had been forming in his mind since his conversation with Ezra. Eleanor, he began, moving to sit across from her. Before we go, there's something we should discuss, another option we haven't considered. She looked up, curiosity in her gaze. What option? Caleb took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. Victoria's power over you comes from your status as her sister, as a single woman without legal protection. If we were, he faltered, struggling to find the right words. If we were married, Eleanor finished for him, her voice steady, her expression unreadable. Yes, Caleb admitted. If we were married, Victoria would have no legal claim on you. She couldn't have you committed, couldn't control your inheritance. You would be under my protection instead. He winced slightly at the archaic phrasing, at the implication of ownership rather than partnership. That's not how I mean it, he clarified quickly. I don't want to control you, Eleanor. I just want to protect you from Victoria's manipulation, from her attempts to force you back into a life you don't want. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, her gaze returning to Lily, who had finished nursing and now lay drowsing against her breast. You would do that? She asked finally. Marry me after knowing me such a short time? Take on the responsibility of a wife when you're still grieving Grace? I would, Caleb said simply, if it meant keeping you safe, keeping you here with Lily, with me. The admission hung in the air between them, more significant than perhaps either had anticipated. Eleanor shifted Lily to her shoulder, patting the baby's back gently as she considered Caleb's proposal. And if I agreed, she said carefully, would it be a true marriage, Caleb, or just a legal arrangement, a protection on paper only? The question caught him off guard with its directness, its implication. He had been thinking primarily of the legal benefits, of thwarting Victoria's plans. But Eleanor's question forced him to consider the fuller meaning of what he was proposing. A life together, a shared future, a relationship that went beyond Lily's immediate needs. I don't know, he admitted honestly. I hadn't thought that far ahead, but I know that I've come to care for you, Eleanor, to respect you, to need you in my life, not just for Lily's sake, for my own. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was too soon for that, too complicated by grief and circumstance. But it was an acknowledgement of possibility, of potential, of a future neither had imagined when Eleanor first appeared at his door. Eleanor's expression softened, a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty in her eyes. I care for you too, Caleb, she said quietly, more than I expected to, more than I probably should, given how recently we've both lost those we loved. She hesitated, then continued, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. But marriage is a serious step, one that binds us together legally, morally, in the eyes of the community, and in the eyes of God. I'm not sure either of us is ready for that commitment, that finality. Caleb nodded, understanding her hesitation, sharing it to some degree. We could still leave, he said. Start over somewhere Victoria can't reach us. Build a new life on our own terms, at our own pace. Abandoning everything you've built here, Eleanor countered gently. Everything Grace helped you create, everything you planned together. Eleanor's words struck Caleb like a physical blow. Whispering Pines. How could he contemplate leaving it? He'd arrived here 7 years ago with nothing but Grace beside him and determination in his heart. They'd built the cabin together, her hands alongside his on every beam. Her laughter still echoed in the kitchen, where she'd taught herself to bake bread at this altitude. The aspens she'd planted along the eastern fence were just now tall enough to dance in the wind as she'd promised they would. This wasn't just land, it was the physical manifestation of their love story. Every fence post and window frame, holding memories his heart wasn't ready to abandon. Yet staying meant fighting, not just for Eleanor's freedom, but for the right to build something new without erasing what came before. Could this place that had witnessed his greatest love and deepest grief now accommodate hope and renewal? The question terrified him almost as much as it beckoned. What do you want, Eleanor? he asked, realizing he had been making assumptions, as Ezra had pointed out. Not what you think is best for me or for Lily, but what you truly want for yourself. Eleanor looked surprised at the question, as if no one had asked her that in a very long time. She was silent for a moment, her gaze moving around the small cabin, then out the window to the snow-covered landscape beyond. I want freedom, she said finally. Freedom to grieve in my own home, to heal at my own pace. Freedom to make my own choices, to build a new life that honors William and Daniel without being trapped by their absence. She looked back at Caleb, her eyes clear and direct. And I want to stay here, with you and Lily, to see where this unexpected connection might lead, without the pressure of immediate decisions, immediate commitments. The simple honesty of her answer touched Caleb deeply. He reached across the small space between them, taking her free hand in his. Then we stay, he said. We find another way to handle Victoria, to protect you from her manipulations. How? Eleanor asked, though hope had begun to replace the resignation in her eyes. If we don't marry, if we don't flee, what alternative is there? Caleb squeezed her hand gently, his mind working through possibilities. We fight, he said simply. We challenge Victoria's assertions about your mental state. We find allies in town. Ezra, for one. The doctor, perhaps. People who can testify to your stability, your competence. He paused, then added more hesitantly, and we consider adjusting our living arrangements to satisfy the town's sense of propriety. You mean my returning to the main house? Eleanor clarified, understanding his meaning immediately. Living together openly, but not as husband and wife. As family, Caleb suggested, as Lily's father and her caregiver. It's not perfect, not entirely respectable by the town's standards, but it's better than this separation, this pretense that you're just a hired nurse coming and going at appointed times. Eleanor considered this, weighing the implications, the potential reactions. The gossip would continue, she pointed out. Let it, Caleb said, surprising himself with his vehemence. We know the truth of our situation, of our relationship. That's what matters. A small smile curved Eleanor's lips. And what is the truth of our relationship, Caleb Morgan? The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither had fully articulated. Caleb looked at Eleanor, at her clear gray-blue eyes, at the gentle curve of her cheek, at Lily sleeping peacefully against her shoulder, and felt something shift inside him, something he had thought permanently broken with Grace's death. The truth, he said slowly, is that you came into our lives when we needed you most, that you saved Lily, and in doing so, you saved me as well, that I've come to care for you in a way I didn't think possible, so soon after losing Grace. He paused, gathering courage for the rest. And the truth is that I don't know exactly what we are to each other yet, Eleanor. But I want the chance to find out, without running away, without rushing into decisions driven by fear rather than choice. Eleanor's eyes had filled with tears, though they didn't fall. I want that too, she whispered, the chance to discover what might be possible given time. They sat in silence then, hands still joined, while outside the snow continued to fall, covering Whispering Pines Ranch in a fresh blanket of white. The decision had been made, though neither had said it explicitly. They would stay, would fight Victoria's attempts to control Eleanor's life, would face the town's judgment and gossip together. What do we do next? Eleanor asked finally, her voice steadier now, her posture more relaxed, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. We go home, Caleb said simply. Back to the main house, together, tonight. And tomorrow we start gathering our allies, building our defense against whatever Victoria might try. Home, Eleanor repeated, the words soft on her lips, as if testing how it felt, how it sounded. I haven't had a real home since Daniel died. Since William. You have one now, Caleb assured her. With us. For as long as you want it. Eleanor's face transformed with those simple words. Let's go home. As if some internal battle had finally reached its resolution. The smile that bloomed wasn't just relief. It carried the quiet dignity of a woman reclaiming her right to choose her own path. As she rose with Lily nestled against her shoulder, Caleb saw not just the woman who had stumbled half-frozen to his door weeks ago, but someone new, someone forged in the crucible of their shared struggles, Someone who belonged not just with Lily, but with him. "It's time," she said, and her voice held both certainty and promise, that whatever came next, they would face it not as two damaged souls seeking shelter, but as a family defending its right to exist. Caleb rose as well, gathering Eleanor's small bundle of belongings. As they stepped outside into the snowy night, he felt a curious lightness in his chest, a hope he had thought lost forever. They were choosing to stay, to fight, to build something new from the foundations of what had been. Not a replacement for what they had lost, but an honoring of it, a way forward that acknowledged the past without being imprisoned by it. The walk to the main house was silent but companionable, their breath clouding in the cold air, their footprints marking a path in the fresh snow. Above them, stars had begun to appear as the clouds thinned, pinpricks of light in the vast Wyoming sky. As they reached the cabin door, Caleb paused, his hand on the latch. "Tomorrow I'll ride to town and speak with Dr. Morrison," he said. "He delivered Lily, treated Grace. He's a good man who understands grief. He'll testify to your competence if needed." Eleanor nodded, a new resolve in her face. "And I'll write to Judge Patterson in Laramie. He was a friend of my father's." Victoria's influence doesn't reach as far as she believes. Caleb pushed open the door, the warmth of the fire greeting them like an embrace. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight they had made their choice. They would face what came together. Home, Caleb thought, looking at Eleanor walking beside him, at Lily nestled against her. Not the home he had planned, not the life he had expected, but home nonetheless. A promise in the storm, unexpected and precious and worth fighting for.